Washington has an elite group of wide receivers.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button. Click that little bell down below as well, so never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Also, make sure to follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Locked On Huskies. We've got a whole lot of fun practice content that we're dropping over there as well. So feel free to just stay engaged with us wherever you're online, pretty much. That's what we like to say, because we're online all the time. But Lars, we're also at practice all the time. We just got back from Thursday's practice. We want to get into some of the standouts that we saw on the field of Thursday. We like giving you a little just overall practice report from each day, but we need to talk about Washington's offensive line. We got a lot of questions about that after yesterday's show, talking about how we believe that this could be a top 5 offense in the Big Ten. So we want to address some of the offensive line, not concerns that we have, some of the optimism that we have regarding it, why we believe it'll take a step forward. But we also believe that Washington's wide receiver core is going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. I don't want to go as far to say the best in the Big Ten, because Jeremiah Smith still does exist. But outside of that, would you be surprised if this is a top 3 group in this conference?
Absolutely not. And I think it's kind of funny how that Ohio State game is going to right away prove who has the best and kind of set the benchmark for how close UW is to having the best. And I think when you look at, because the question is, how much of a jump can Omari Evans make, where he's coming from Penn State, was not, the premium number 1 target. Also, it wasn't from a passing offense where, just the outside receivers didn't get as much targets as you would think, especially like at Ohio State, at Washington, at, a few other schools that we're not going to name. But everybody else beyond that, Kevin Green is a question mark because of the injury last season, where we see the potential in camp. We saw it last year as well. But until we see it on a game consistently for, let's say an entire month, we can't, come in here and say, hey, Kevin Green might be the best slot receiver in the conference. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. But until he has to prove it. But the depth and talent is there. And then obviously at the top, it's Denzel Boston. Like, you have probably the second or third best receiver in the conference. Again, Jeremiah Smith is his own things. I'm just curious, like, how close do we think Denzel is? Because he's top 3, maybe top 2. I just don't know if he's top 1, but again, he's right there. But in terms of a depth and overall quality, it has to be top 2 along with Ohio State.
So shout out to everybody over on the Big Ten squad, because we had a wonderful conversation on this week's show where we talked about the passing, rushing, and receiving leaders in the conference, made our predictions, and we all just kind of were in agreement on Jeremiah Smith just being an absolute alien. So I feel like there is still, it's no disrespect to Denzel Boston or any of the other top-tier receivers in this conference. Jeremiah Smith could be the number 1 overall pick in the 2027 NFL draft. Like that's how good of a prospect he is. So it still does feel like there's a little bit of a gulf between him and everybody else, not to push back on what you're saying, because I think you're right. I just think that there's still that much of a gap that alone will just put Ohio State over the top, without mentioning Carnell Tate and some of the top tier targets they have. But when we go up and down this roster, a guy you didn't mention, obviously, for no particular reason, was Rashid Williams. Like, Rashid Williams is another guy who we've seen make plays time and time again throughout spring camp this year, fall last year. And now we believe that he's ready to take a step forward, a lot like Denzel did last year after sitting for 2 years and waiting his turn behind some of the other top tier talents that Washington has. And I think that's just a really exciting thing to think about, because having those 3 guys at the top, when you throw Omari Evans into that mix as well, combined with a Kevin Green Jr. and Audric Harris, who made a really nice play at camp today. It was I got to make sure I check my notes there, a 39-yard touchdown that he hauled in from Treston, Kini, McMillan, where he did what he did best in high school and was lined up in the slot and utilized his speed to get up the seam and get behind the defense and pull in the deep ball. So it's really fun to see what those guys can bring to the table as well. And it brings us to a much bigger point in the conversation, something you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, not even just over the course of fall camp, but over the last few months, in these young guys, these true and these redshirt freshman wide receivers who have done nothing but make plays since they got here. And I mean, it wouldn't be a practice report if we weren't talking about Dezmen Roebuck and what he did today. He made a phenomenal grab in one-on-ones where it's a perfectly thrown ball from, I believe it was either Kai Horton or Treston Kini McMillan again, who just put it perfectly over his back shoulder, and he hauled in a touchdown while working against Ramon Adams. And then later on during 11-on-11s, he made a real nice play in the front corner of the end zone right next to where I was standing and just adjusted. That's one of the things that I love the most about him. He did a really nice job adjusting towards his back shoulder and making the play and then just falling right in the corner of the end zone, a lot like the clip that all our everydayers and all Husky fans got to see from the social media team where he was working against Dylan Robinson. And a guy like that, you and I had a great conversation before we hit record on him. We said, wait, hold on, we need to save this because coming into this fall camp, really, you and I were saying, this is a guy who we got to be patient with. Maybe you wait a year or two before we see what he turns into. Didn't think he was going to play a snap this season. And before the show, you were like, hey, is there a chance this guy burns his red shirt?
It's becoming hard to envision him at least not. And again, I understand the pushback of, well, you have such a huge amount of depth in the room. Why would you play him? And certainly why would you burn his red shirt? But when a guy makes plays consistently in camp, and I'm not just talking one practice, two practice, we're talking a week and a half now.
7 in, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and that's kind of what I was saying, before we started hitting record, where if he's able to do this for another week and a half, like it almost becomes coaching malpractice to at the very least not get him in 4 or 5 games, which I think that might become, the result where they get him in games, but he still doesn't burn his red shirt because that's when you're talking about the Audric Harris thing last year where he's getting 7 or 8 games, but is it really beneficial or are you just getting him to burn his red shirt? Where it's worth pointing out, Kevin Cummings did say, we are going to play at least one freshman a year and one freshman is going to burn their red shirt. When you look at the 25 class, you had 3 receivers coming in, so Audric being the one guy to burn his red shirt made sense. You had 5 this year. I wonder, is it going to be 2? Because the over-under is going to be 1.5. And the question is it 1 or is it 2? And I think it's going to end up being 2 somehow, probably because of injury. But, man, Dezmen's making a case without injury just to say, you know what, how are you not going to play me?
So I think if he was here in January, this is going to be part of the discussion. Because my reasoning was it's not just, all of those guys that we just rattled off that he has to compete with. It's the guys that were here in January that were able to go through these workouts, namely Chris Lawson and Raiden Vines-Bright, who is nice to see Chris Lawson back on the field today, by the way. He was going through some more drills after he's been sidelined with an injury, but still going through workouts and different things over the first week and a half of practice or so. So I think that is its own thing, plus the fact that you have to just think about the fact that those guys know the playbook so much more and they're just a little bit more physically ready to go after having the opportunity to get through January workouts, go through spring ball, that sort of stuff. It's not that I think you're wrong because the way he's making plays, you can't keep a guy like that off the field for so long. But I think it just kind of points to the overall theme of the segment here is this is a really talented group of wide receivers, and having a guy like that who you can have waiting in the wings for a year, maybe even 2 years before it's fully time to unleash him because of all the players that are in front of him. That's a good problem to have. And it's a problem that we've been talking about with Justice Williams as well, who made probably my favorite play of camp so far. He's just coming across the middle of the field and he gets toward the sideline where we're standing and he just reaches out with his left hand and snags the ball and then is carrying a couple defenders an extra 5-7 yards down the field before they finally blew the whistle. And it really is the same discussion, just at a different position, in my opinion, because it's all the traits, all the talent is there for that player to be successful. But it just comes into the college football thing sometimes of you've got to wait your turn.
You're 100% right. And I think that's also the fact that we got through almost this entire segment without mentioning Justice, that's another guy that he's competing with.
I was going to find a way to do that.
And as you should. And we talked about it a couple of days ago on the show as well. It's, there's so many other guys where, especially Justice being 6'3", 6'4", no slight to Dezmen, but I don't know if Dezmen's ready to be that guy where you can just pluck the ball out of the air and then drag guys, where Dezmen's his own type of receiver. And I think, they might just want him to have that full year in the Big Ten, get in the program, get in the weight room, learn the offense, and then just completely unleash him in 26. But, man, just watching what he's done in fall camp, it's so hard to do because he's ironically the one guy who hasn't been hurt. Raiden was hurt at some point in spring camp. Marcus Harrison, you go Chris Lawson, you go down the list, it's the only two that haven't been hurt are Deji and Dezmen.
Sure. No, I like where you're going with that, and that's certainly going to be something to monitor as you keep moving along here, because Kevin Cummings mentioned it as well with Raiden. The biggest thing is making sure that they can keep him healthy. Lars, we got a lot of questions about the offensive line, and Michael Switzer gave us some really nice insight into why he's so high on his group. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights like me, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And that's great news for all Husky fans out there, because if you believe in this team as much as Lars and I do, and you think that they're going to hit the over of 7.5 wins, which is their total on FanDuel right now, you should go check it out, because with all the young stars that this team has, the way the schedule sets up, I couldn't be more excited about what we're going to see on Montlake this fall. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, it's always great when these things just work out so well. We got a lot of questions on our Wednesday show, on our Thursday show that we recorded on Wednesday, about the state of the offensive line, where some people were throwing some rankings at us. Some Oregon fans, shockingly enough, were like, oh, why do you think this group is going to take a step forward? And outside of the fact that we're able to watch practice every day and see what this group looks like, we were able to hear from Michael Switzer on Thursday, who spent a good long time. That clip is up on our YouTube, by the way. Go check that out, and all forms of social media, who spent a nice long time talking about the depth of his group, the attention to detail, the focus, and just the overall physicality. All of these things that we just really didn't get a chance to see last year, because at this point last year, we still didn't know what the starting five is going to look like. We don't this year, but it's a much different discussion, because there's so much talent, especially at these two guard spots. How is that going to play out? And when we just look at this group from top to bottom, I think Jerez Party has really improved at right tackle. Having a veteran, true leader kind of guy in Carver Willis at left tackle, plus getting Landen Hatchett back at center, and then figuring out these two guard spots with a whole lot of talent, especially when you look at a fifth-year senior, in Landen Hatchett, and Paki Finau, a really talented redshirt freshman, a left guard, plus these two freshmen that are pushing those guys in John Mills and Taulealea. It not only makes for a great battle where all of these guys are getting better every day, but it's just a plethora of options that this group simply did not have last season.
It's kind of funny to hear Oregon fans, but really anybody, say like, well, how are they different this year? It's like, I mean, just straight up, the number of bodies, A, and B, the guys they brought in. Like, you brought in a power 4 offensive lineman, like you mentioned, in Carver Willis. You have Landen Hatchett as well, like kind of just not a stopgap per se, but just kind of like an extra 6'7", almost like a 6-man in the NBA, where you might not start every single game, but he's really kind of just that veteran that can help the young guards, take that next step in practice, in the games, and just be that, voice to say, you know what, like maybe work on this or try this. But he's got like a safety net, if you will, where if the freshmen aren't ready, you got Landen to plug and play. But you also know that Landen's more than happy to let those guys cement himself, because he just wanted to be back a part of the program, be with his brother, be closer to home and things like that. So it was the best of both worlds there. And then, like you mentioned, you have Jerez Party, who came in last year as a transfer, Max McCree, who also another transfer, is providing depth as well, and he's another year in the program. So all those things go to say, well, yeah, the offensive line is massively different than last season. I mean, you'd be completely ignorant, but it's ironic where that message came from. So, that actually does check out. But with that being said, it's everything we've seen. And also, you mentioned Michael Switzer. That, I think, is kind of the quiet, difference in the room. And this is no shot at Brendan Carroll, because we love Brendan Carroll as a phenomenal offensive line coach. But Michael Switzer really does seem to, kind of be that true teacher, technician, just able to get the best out of his guys, connect with them. And it's no slight to Brendan. It's just a compliment to Switzer, if you will. And I think that might truly end up being the difference maker of the season, whereas Brendan kind of just, seemed like he was, obviously he was working with what he had. But there was not really going to ever be a plan of, hey, let's try and get some of these freshmen truly in the mix until, aside from Pocky, because that's a separate story. But, I think this season, it's just Switzer seems to have a different kind of connection with the group, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's one thing where this is something I know you've pointed out several times, is shout out to Mike Brewster as well, the assistant offensive line coach, bringing in a guy of that pedigree from his college days, from his NFL days as well, who is just a little bit more dedicated to working with the interior guys, because that was the plan. That's what he played. I love the way that this offensive line room shapes out on the coaching side of things, as well as on the player side, because, we look up and down the talent on this roster. A name we didn't mention was Maximus McCree, as someone who can, we saw him work a lot at right tackle in the spring. Now he's working a little bit more on the left side as well. A guy like that who can be your third tackle, who last year was just not in football shape through no fault of his own after taking 18 months off the game to help out his family. Like, there are so many different things that are different about this group compared to last season. And I know that there's, a subsection of every fan base that's like, wait, you're talking about true freshmen and trying to rely on them as key members of the offensive line. If the coaching staff is comfortable with that, I'm comfortable talking about it, to be 100% honest. And I think it's something where, especially when we look at those guys, it's not like just to bring it back to this discussion about Maximus McCree, right? When he got here last year, he was what, 270, 275?
Yeah, that's fair. Being generous, yeah.
These guys are 330, 340. Like, these are massive, massive individuals who we saw it in the spring. And that's why when we're talking, especially when, we talk about Dezmen Roebuck and how important spring practice is for these guys, having both of those guys on campus for spring practice, where they're going against a defensive line that is full of transfers and veterans and guys that are in their 4th, 5th, 6th year playing college football, getting the opportunity and the experience to go against those dudes for, it's not just a month, it's player run practices that they hold over the summer. It's all these different workouts, it's all these different things, and getting to learn so much it really is a 7-8 month head start that you have by being able to enroll in January, and having both of those guys in there for that portion of time. It really does help them get a huge jump start on their college career.
I mean, if you think about it, it's having a season before you actually have your first season. When you have from January to August, that's 6-7 months, 8 months technically. If you think about it, throw in probably just 5 months total in terms of actual football work and things like that. How long is the season? 4 or 5 months? Like, that's why it's so imperative. And I can understand people saying, well, what's the difference, especially if you're still a freshman? It's, well, when we saw John Mills, come on campus, again, there's Big Country, and then there's John Mills. Like, John Mills was a guy where I'm like, if you told me that he was like a redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore, but yeah, he's probably the next guy up, kind of like Paki Finau. Same thing with Taulealea, where we're driving out of Husky Stadium, and I'm like, who's that, probably junior, senior lineman right there? Oh, that's Cham. Holy cow. Okay. Right. And it really makes you kind of step back and think, and then you see it at practice where, again, they're holding up in reps. They're freshmen, so they're going to get beat a couple of times, but we haven't truly seen them struggle consistently for multiple practices.
That's the thing.
Exactly. Where if they, it's what we almost like the discussion with Dezmen, like we were saying, if you put him in the game and he has 3 targets and he has 3 drops, okay, maybe he's not fully ready yet. We haven't seen that from either John or Champ. And I think that is why the coaching staff is saying, like, until they struggle, we're going to give them every reason to play.
Yeah, and because there certainly are still things that both those guys need to work on. Where you mentioned not seeing them struggle, there are certainly still reps that they're losing, because I wanted to highlight one of those for a second. And the one I wanted to highlight was, there have been a couple of times where I've seen Ontario Thompson go at a few of those guys and beat them with power. And it's one thing where they're still learning how to use the anchors that they have in pass protection, which is, it's okay, because that's something that takes time. That's something you and I talk about whenever we talk about a high school offensive lineman and talk about recruiting, is pass protection and learning how to anchor and learning how to do those things are the last thing possible, because it also brings us back to a conversation that I had with Derek Coleman-Brusa when we had him on the show a few months ago, where he told me, yeah, I'm so much bigger and more physical than every single person in this league that I could just, pick him up and move him out of the way if I wanted to. I'm not quoting him on that part, but that really is the discussion, because these guys are just learning how to do certain things and especially at the high school level, where, it's no slight at most high school coaches, where you just want to take advantage of the physical talent that those guys have. And a lot of times that's run blocking. That's just, hey, that's our biggest, strongest lineman. Run behind that guy. And for the offensive lineman, it's just run forward, run over whoever's in your way, that kind of thing. So it takes a year or two, especially when you're going up against someone who is just as talented of an athlete and as strong as Ontario Thompson is. Like, it takes time to learn those things. And it's why it's so good that we get to see that every day in practice. And again, why having them in the spring is so important right now and going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the thing with Derek, because when he was out of practice, his legs are like Jonah Coleman, like it's massive. So it's one thing to have the physical traits, like a guy you were a big fan of, and I was as well, Justin Hilkema. He had the size, did not, he still needed a year in the system, in the playbook, all those sorts of things. But now we're seeing him get a decent amount of reps. You can have the size, but until you truly master the entire playbook and get all the refined things down, that's why it's hard for offensive linemen to play as freshmen and why you rarely see it throughout any team in college football, honestly. I mean, you can count on one hand the number of true freshmen that are actually good, can hold up, and play an entire season.
Right, because it's not like we're sitting here talking about these guys like they need to be Caden Proctor at Alabama. You're not throwing this kid in to have him start at left tackle on day one and saying whatever happens from here happens. No, there are so many things that go into this. And one thing that I wanted to mention on top of that, one of the most important things that these guys need to continue to learn, and it's why I'm highlighting, Antario Thompson beating some of these guys with power, is balance. Learning the balance and how to do that with anchoring and all these other different things can take some time when you're 17, 18 years old, 6'6" and 340 pounds. I know, shocking to hear that, right? But Lars, you mentioned seeing Derek Coleman-Bruce at practice. We just want to talk about some of our other observations from Thursday's workout. Just want to make sure I clarify one thing as we get into this. Derek was not at Thursday's practice. We did see him a little bit earlier on the week. It was Sunday or Monday, somewhere around then, when he was able to come out and take in a visit, an unofficial visit. Let me again be very clear there, because his brother's on the team, since it is a recruiting dead period. Some of the ins and outs of the recruiting calendar are always fun to discuss and work around. But Lars, with that being said, fun transition there, right? Let's talk about some of the physicality that we've seen from these recent practices, where we've talked about Ryland Dillard-Allen being a guy who's been a little bit of an instigator in terms of just a couple of skirmishes. But it's just another thing where, as we see these first couple of days of pads, there are always one or two of these where tempers run hot. And it was really great to get a chance to talk to Carver Willis about this on Thursday, where he was a guy who's been consistently stepping in the middle and being like, hey, it's time to calm down. He's a really smart kid. It's been really great to get to know him. And he was great to just say, yeah, I'm going to run over there and I'm going to be the first person in the middle of it, because we need to make sure that we're cooling things down on both sides and saying, hey, remember, at the end of the day, yeah, we're competing right now, but we are still teammates. And it was great to get that insight from him.
And it honestly applies to when you go on Saturdays. You want the toughness, the slight decent amount of aggression, but much like when you have skirmishes on Saturdays, you want to make sure you have veterans that are on the team that are able to step in before you get that penalty, because kind of like in 2024, where we saw, some kind of ill-advised penalties come about for various reasons. You need those veterans that are grounded, that know, hey, it's okay to, be chippy. It's okay to do whatever, but you got to draw the line at some point. I think Carver seems to be that perfect balance between, hey, I'm tough, I'm going to be able to push guys around, but I'm also not going to, throw somebody onto the sideline and, push them all the way down to the ground and keep them there and cause a skirmish. Like, there's a fine line between, maybe this team is a little, torn. Maybe they're, divisive. Maybe it's these guys versus that guys. It's just, I can honestly see Jed, and I'm not saying this was the case because Jed did not do this, but I can almost see Jed kind of smiling, slightly, where it's like, good, my guys are really getting after it in a good, healthy way. By the way, go look at NFL training camps. Look how many
Mike Vrabel was like, he was bleeding from the face the other day with something that was going on. And let's be very clear, since we did get a chance to see this, Jed was not happy with the way that things transpired on Thursday. So we just want to make sure that we're clear on that, because I know that there are some people who's like, wait, hold on a second, is that what happened? No, Jed has been very clear about, that kind of stuff is not okay. And usually some of those players end up taking a lap or different things like that after some of these skirmishes ensue. But let's move away from that for a minute. Let's talk about Alex McLaughlin. We had a conversation about him the other day because we got a chance to talk to Taylor Mays, and he gave us a little bit of insight into him, which was great. He just keeps making plays, man. He had a really nice TFL today. And then he had one of the nicer plays from Thursday where Dylan Robinson was working against Audric Harris. And I was standing behind the play, so I couldn't see if Dylan got a hand on it, and that was why the ball bounced the way it did, or if it just hit Audric like on his knee as he was falling to the ground. But the ball popped up in the air, and Alex, who was playing in the box roll on that possession, just saw the ball, made a really nice reaction, and laid out to make a diving play for the interception, which, if I'm not mistaken, was the only one I have on my sheet for the day. And it's just really fun to see the way he's continued to progress, because it's something you and I and a lot of the other writers have been talking about as we're standing on the sideline. It's, hey, during spring ball, he was running a lot with the second team. And for someone who, how high I am in particular on Alex, has been, beating the drum for him to be a starter potentially as soon as the season. it was kind of like, oh, maybe that's not going to be the case. And he's put on all this extra weight, which is great to see. And the way he's played this fall, it was a lot like what we were talking about with Adam Muhammad the other day. He just looks more confident, more decisive, and just more comfortable in the role that he's been given.
Yeah, it's something Taylor May said, and you can go check it out on Huskies Wire as well, where Alex basically has everything, and the last thing to do was just add a little more weight. And I think he said he's up to 201, 202, somewhere in that ballpark, listed at 198 on the roster. So, again, shows he's gained a few pounds in fall camp. My thing is he's so instinctive that the weight, to me, I understand the reason and the impetus for it, but a guy that makes plays, where you go look at what he did in Northern Arizona, 160-plus tackles, 12 tackles for loss, sacks, interceptions. He did – when you talk about filling up the stat box, it's Alex McLaughlin to a T. And when you talk about the secondary, how do you keep a guy like that off the field where obviously, Mikal has been a little dinged up, CJ Christian's the other safety, and then you have Ryland Dillard-Allen. I think there's going to be a way where you find a way to get all three of those guys or all four of those guys somehow involved on the field, because when guys make plays consistently in camp like Alex has, and certainly, CJ being a senior, you're not going to, put him in the number 2 spot, where you just have to find a way. And this is, again, why we harp on Ryan Walters and John Richardson. That pairing is going to find a way to maximize this secondary like no other. And it's why you go and bring a head coach who just be the head coach of the defense. And with Ryan's track record, I'm pretty confident that Alex is going to have a pretty good season this fall.
Oh, I agree. I really like just the plan for him at this point in time, where if he does wind up usurping one of Mikal or CJ for a starting role, I just think that he's going to be a really, really productive player. And it leads into something that you and I wanted to talk about, because we got a question the other day from someone who said, hey, you guys have overlooked the inside linebackers group a little bit. And is there something to be concerned about there? Is there any particular reason why? No, not necessarily. And I think a big reason for that is Alex and CJ and Mikal and these guys who are walking down into the box. It kind of takes a little bit of attention off of, a Buda Alukta or a Devin Bryant, and also just the way that those inside linebackers move around sometimes. It can be a little hard to keep track of, to be completely honest. Like it's something, I forgot, X-Ray Alexander started lining up in the will spot, and then he walked down to play wide 9 outside linebacker. Like there's a lot of things like that happen as well. And it just feels like they have done a really good job of doing their jobs and, setting the edge, fitting the runs, different things like that. Buda Alukta made a tremendous play today where they were running a goal line drill, 4th and goal, and he just shot a gap and was able to get in the backfield and track down Adam Muhammad. And this group is still making plays like that every day. I think we had a little bit more to say about them in the spring because they were making splash plays every day. Specifically, Buda was around the ball every single day, finding a way to make an impact with whether it be a PBU, an interception, some kind of big play. It's not that that those guys aren't making an impact in fall camp. They've just been doing a really good job of doing what they're asked to do. And then on plays like that, they're still finding a way to make a big impact and make big plays.
And it's also reporting out, 2 things here. The scheme is absolutely helping Turi, where you look at what the complaint was that we've talked about at Wazoo, which was, he had all these missed tackles. Well, is that bad angle? Is that bad assignment? Is that, Buda just not, being in the right position or just being careless? I think it's clearly probably all of those were just not a good fit at Wazoo. And for whatever reason, now it is working at UW. And I think it's because he knows, again, we talked about the high football IQ. That's another example of a guy where when you put him in the right scheme and you put him in the position to succeed, he has the talent and ability to do that. That's what's intriguing about this group, though, because when we talk, another reason to think about why we haven't talked about them as much, you have the 5 down line in front. You have 5 in the secondary. I'm not good at math here, but 5 and 5 makes 10. That means you only got 1 spot left here. So that's why a lot of it is, we don't necessarily notice them as much, but it's also a good thing because they're not making missed assignments. They're not getting exposed. It's just sometimes the way the scheme works, you don't necessarily notice them as much. But yet, I feel like as we get to go through the season, they're certainly going to be felt when it comes to opposing offenses.
No, and that's the thing, right? Where it's something where also I like to keep in mind, Ryan Walters' leading tackler for both years at Purdue was Dylan Tiedemann at safety, which is one of the reasons we've harped so heavily on that group. Is those guys are going to be involved. And they're going to take a little bit of stress and pressure off of the inside linebacker, who's going to be able to cheat a little bit more downhill to, fill gaps and fit runs and, act as a cleanup man of sorts because of this front, which is one of the things that Buda mentioned in the spring. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Lars, from these last couple of weeks, is anything else that's really been standing out to you before we get out of here?
I mean, I just think when you look at the totality of what we've seen in fall camp, Ryan Walters touched on it. There's not a bad group. I think that's kind of one of the things I want to know. When you talked about people asking about linebackers, we haven't seen a cause for concern with, oh, wow, look at, Ephesian Pricelock and Takario. Maybe they're reading too much of the headlines, or, the defensive linemen, maybe the transfers aren't as good. Everybody that we've seen, from Zach Durfee, Antonio Thompson, even Simone Peppa, the guys that we don't really get to talk about as much, Logan Sagapalu, I haven't seen any regression from them. I think everything that we've seen is either what we expected to see or slightly above in the case of Alex and a few others, and certainly Raiden down. I'm just curious to see, when we talk about that blending of freshmen and veterans, how it ends up coming to fruition. But we really haven't had any question marks in terms of how is this position going to hold up for that position. There's really no bad spot on this roster.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, as we've gone through these last couple of weeks, I love that you pointed that out, because that's the thing, right? Where we're saying, hey, don't sleep on Washington for this reason or that reason. And we go through these position groups. It's there's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of talent here. And it's exciting to think about, because Jed Fish and this coaching staff have done a really great job building a roster that has some high-end veteran talent and some promising young guys as well. Before we get out of here, my last thing is I want to give a shout out to what we need to call the Lockdown Huskies connection, because the best throw of the day went to Dash Beierly, who dropped it in a bucket over double coverage into Austin Simmons, who almost ran over me and my mom on the sidelines. She's visiting and wanted to come out to practice. So shout out to those guys for making a perfect throw right in front of us and just almost ran us over. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Dash, because I think he might have fallen behind a little bit in the QB3 race, because Kini McMillan has made some tremendous plays throughout camp, and I think his mobility is really exciting, but Dash has that same level of mobility as well. And as we continue to watch him grow, I'm so excited to see what he can turn into, because as we don't need to think about a world without Dezmen Williams, because he has 3 years of eligibility remaining. But I look at Dash and I look at Kini, and I think both of those guys are very exciting quarterbacks to just go through this Jed Fish system, because over the next few years, I think they both came in as somewhat raw players with a lot of tools and a lot of talent, but they weren't just quite as refined as what Dezmen was, which is why we saw him on the field for 13 games as a true freshman. And I think both of those guys are going to be really interesting case studies in how good Jed is at developing quarterbacks. So as their careers play out, I'm so excited to see how it turns out for both of them, and especially that Lockdown Huskies connection, which was, again, just wonderful to see. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you miss when we post a new video. And of course, click that subscribe button as well. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.